Hello, my little giants. If you guys haven't cringed yourself into a sarcophagus after hearing that, welcome back to another lecture from Mr. Lickty. Now, I wanted to give some housekeeping real quick. I took some feedback on some of the slides that you guys had last week, and I tried to make some adjustments to how I did this one, particularly the font size. I tried to make things a lot more bigger and more spacious. So hopefully the guys helps with your guys' needs. If you're watching online, obviously that won't be much of a problem, but if you're in person on the following days, you might like that a little bit more. Now, back on topic to what we are learning today, one of my more favorite topics. Today, we're going to be looking at Germany directly after World War I. What exactly is going on in Germany, you may be asking? Well, today, we're going to try to figure that out. And before we do that, I think we need to look at exactly how Germany was looking after the war and, some of the effects it had. So to start off, I want us to take a look at this nice little chart here. It might seem like a lot of numbers and a bit confusing, but it's actually pretty easy once you look at it. What this chart details is essentially, the amount of soldiers that were used in the war based on countries and exactly what happened to their soldiers. So down this column right here, you have a total mobilized, which means the amount of soldiers those countries actually ended up putting into it. And then it's sorted by the amount that actually ended up perishing during the war, were simply wounded, etc., etc. With the casualties percent mobilized is basically, what percent of all the people that went to war ended up falling into one of these categories. I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to take a look at that, see if there's anything you particularly notice and anything that stands out. We'll call that time. Remember, you can always go back, rewind, whatever you need to do for this. Now, I think the first thing that you guys should have been looking for is exactly who were the major players when it came to World War I. There might be a lot of countries here, but some of them are almost negligible in the sense that they didn't really contribute that much to the war effort itself. Like, for the most part, you don't really need to know what Portugal contributed or even exactly know the amount that Bulgaria did. But the big players for both sides, of course, you have Russia, France, the British, and the United States slightly below that. And on the Central Powers, the opposite side, the side that ended up losing, we have Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Turkey, not so important. But the big ones that stand out the most should be Austria-Hungary and Germany on the Central Powers. They contributed a lot, with actually a large percent of the people that actually being sent there having some form of casualties, especially for Austria-Hungary. But the amount of people that Germany and Austria ended up pumping into this war effort was pretty staggering. And the Allied countries, you should notice that, Russia, even though they weren't in the war for that long, they did contribute a lot too. And they would end up being affected by this. But, if you guys were paying attention earlier, this presentation is going to be more so focusing on what's going on in Germany. And Germany ended up putting a lot of soldiers into the war effort. And that seems, all well and good. There might not be much that goes with that. But if you could dig a little bit deeper, you really notice that compared to a lot of these other countries, compared to like the United States, who only had 100,000 casualties, Germany had nearly 2 million. Germany suffered a lot, and this next little graph here is going to demonstrate just that. The way this graph is structured is a lot different from some that you may be used to, so let me explain it real quickly. Essentially, there are two different time periods that are going on in this graph. 1910 and 1925. The white bars are what's going on in 1910, and the black bars are what's going on in 1925. And what this is supposed to show is the difference that's going on between these two time frames. In addition, it's showing all of the population of Germany categorized by age. So if you were to look down here, in, what would this be? This would be 1910. There were approximately 750,000 one-year-olds. Or going up here, in 1910, there were approximately, I would say that's 25,000 85-year-olds. That's how this is sorted. And when you look really closely at this graph, there should be one very staggering difference you notice. And it should be what's going on in these two sections. Now, for these particular age groups, it looks like it's ages 7 through 12. In 1910, there were a lot more 7 through 12-year-olds than there were in 1925. And on the surface, you might be wondering exactly why that is. what this tells us is that there had to have been some event that led to there being like this. There's a reason why there are less children during this time. And when it comes to Germany, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, it's because the struggles were so bad. In the sense that, the children of this time, it wasn't very likely in 1925 that they would have survived to the age of 7 or 12. Which is kind of crazy. You almost take for granted that you guys are going to make it to age 13. But in Germany, 1925, there was a very slim chance that you would make it to that age. And it's through a combination of factors, most of them being, the ability to have good health care or access to good nutrition. So that's one takeaway from this. And another interesting takeaway is going on right here. Now, this is sorted on left and right. We have basically people that were born male at birth and people that were born female at birth on this side. Over here, you notice that there were more males back in 1910 than there were in 1925 by nearly 100,000. And this one's a lot more easily explained. This is basically a big decline in population from, a lot of the men being sent to war by Germany perishing during the war effort, which is going to lead to a smaller workforce and ultimately going to contribute to the economy of Germany. I just wanted to use these graphs because, sometimes in history we think that you have to be talking about, what exactly happened and it has to be all word-based, when for the most part, as a historian, you can look at things in a number perspective and have it all make sense. So, hopefully you kind of get across that Germany is going through some troubles at this time, and it's mostly due to the war effort, and there are going to be more problems that end up coming onto it. So, I want to take a step back, and we're going to look at some buildings. It's going to be a bit different from what we were looking at before, but these buildings are all located in the country of France, and they're going to be before and after. And, I want you guys to pretend that you were a French citizen during the time, and think how you would feel seeing these images. And we're going to start with this one right here. A beautiful little hotel. It's in the town of Verdun. That's not so much important. What I want you guys to take away is that there's a beautiful building here that probably was pretty prestigious in town. People probably loved looking by it. This was taken before the war. Now, after the war, if you're a French citizen, this is what this building looked like. Absolutely ruined, decimate. Just an everyday hotel in France, brought down to ruin. Not even necessarily in the battlefield. This one, I believe, was just taken for some random mortar fire. Another instance, we have a beautiful village in France, Etna. This village, very small, has a nice big church there, but some pretty quaint buildings, It looks like a peaceful little place, a nice place to live. That is until, of course, the war ran its course through it, with almost every building being leveled to the ground. And we have this building right here, the Palace of Justice, a pretty important government building in the town of Senlis. As you can see, looks like a pretty sturdy building. And after the war, you might be inclined to think much didn't change. It looks a little bit run down. But if you look really closely at it, if you look through the windows, you're actually just seeing the sky. When it came to this building, only one wall remained, and the whole back of it was completely leveled, as you can see by a lot of the rubble taking form at inside the doorways and the windows, piled high all the way to the top here. So, why do I want you guys to think about that? Because France is going to be a pretty key player going forward. And we need to know exactly why France is operating the way they're going to. So if you're France, not even just looking at the pictures, you have to think about all of these little things, When it comes to rebuilding these buildings, how much is it going to cost? And even if you get the money together, it's going to take time for it to actually get built. It's going to take manpower. And that's just the easy stuff. What about all the priceless pieces of arts that can't be replaced? The beautiful paintings in a museum or an interesting artifact from ancient times that was to be destroyed. The fact of the matter is, France is angry. They lost a lot, and some of it they may never be able to get back. And when it comes to focusing their anger and who exactly they're going to blame, they're going to be looking at the key player that was taking place on the other side, Germany. After World War I, of course, the Allies, they won it. The United States, Britain, and of course, France. And that's important to know because when, wars are won and wars are, coming to a close, you have to decide exactly, what exactly the winner's going to get and how the loser has to pay them back. And, the United States was pretty indifferent. They wanted peace going forward. Great Britain actually wanted Germany to be doing pretty well so they could trade with them. But at all of these conferences, we're going to see the country of France. And they're going to be loud, they're going to be angry, and they're going to want blood from the country of Germany. They're extremely mad, and they blame Germany most of all. And this is in large part due to, previous conflicts they had. Germany and France had clashes 100 years ago, 500 years ago. It was pretty common. And in the war, Germany was the one, dealing the most damage to these French buildings. They were at the border of the country, after all. And of course, they were the most invested in the war. And you can clearly see that simply by looking back at that table that I had on slide 2, just the number of people that Germany was throwing into the war effort. Nearly 2 million dying with 11 million in the war effort. So, I just threw a lot at you, and you may be wondering, Mr. Lichty, what exactly does this all mean? Why does it matter so much what France thinks of Germany? Well, France is going to be the loudest at the table. And they're going to want to make sure that Germany pays and is absolutely held accountable for all of the damages and all of the pain and chaos they inflicted upon them. And they're going to do that by making sure Germany has a lot of things going against them when it comes to making a treaty. The first thing, and probably the most humiliating one to the Germans, was the fact that Germany had to demilitarize, which means, you have to get rid of the military, and their most key area that's in between Germany and France, and it's called the Rhineland. And the Rhineland's extremely important, because this is the part of Germany where nearly all of the industry was taking place, and where a lot of the military might that Germany had was being, kind of stacked up and where it was being shown. The Rhineland was always a prideful thing that the German people had, and France was making sure that they had to almost get rid of it. And on top of just getting rid of the military in that particular area, Germany also had to get rid of their military almost altogether. On that previous table, we saw that Germany had nearly 11 million people serve. After the war, they're going to be limited to having an army that's the size of 100,000 soldiers. Nearly a fraction, not even a fraction of a percent of what they once had. And on top of that, Germany's going to end up losing all of their colonies and overseas possessions. And that's very, very important, because think about it, not just Germany, but Britain, France, and even the United States before this, they had a lot of colonies. They had a lot of land in places like Africa, South America, and even Asia. And with those colonies, they were getting a lot of resources, stuff they didn't have in their own country. Germany, they needed a lot of lumber because they used a lot of it, back in the day. So they were trying to get a lot of lumber, sometimes even coal, from a lot of the colonies. When they had this land in Africa and the South America taken away from them, they basically lost a lot of their economic output. They didn't really have a way to get that much more lumber or coal. And they were going to end up suffering, economically from that. And an even more degrading thing now that I think about it than this first point was something that was put into the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that ended World War I, that was called the War Guilt Clause. With the War Guilt Clause, it was pretty much a statement that Germany had to sign. Germany had to agree to take full responsibility for the war. Germany had to agree that they were the ones responsible for everything. They were the sole cause, the sole proprietors, the single country responsible for all of World War I. And because of that, they were the ones that had to pay what are called reparations, or what we can pretty much call debts to these Allied countries. France, Britain, they're pretty angry at Germany, and they want to make sure that they're paid back for the damages they have, especially France. And they're going to make Germany end up paying a lot, and I mean a lot, of money, an amount that a lot of experts predicted that they would never be able to pay back. And the thought process behind that, besides just making Germany suffer, was that, if Germany didn't have money, they wouldn't be able to, make an army again, and they wouldn't be able to go to war. Hopefully making sure things in the future look a lot better. Now, I want you guys to keep that all in mind, because we're going to look at exactly, what happened to Germany government-wise after World War I. And I realize this has turned into a pretty long video, so I'm going to try to make this quick. Remember, if you ever need to go back and look at the slides themselves, I'll just post them all by their lonesome in Google Classroom. Now, as we move to Germany, one of the key events that happened is that as Germany started to lose the war effort, and many of the soldiers there started to really get sick and tired of fighting, the guy called the Kaiser, Kaiser Wilhelm, or essentially King Wilhelm, is forced to step down. He's forced to abdicate the throne. And that means that Germany doesn't have a king, and they need a new government. And what's going to end up being formed is something called the Weimar Republic. Keep in mind, whenever you see a W in German, it's pronounced with a V sound. Weimar. Here we have the flag of the official government of the Weimar Republic, and if you look here, you'll see a picture of one of the first sessions that was going on there. One of the key takeaways I think you'll notice is that there's a lot of people there. And that's pretty indicative of what that government looked like. To quickly summarize it, it is what we call a republic. And a republic, in terms of what it is a state where the supreme power is held by the people and their elected representative, and which has an elected or nominated president. That means people vote for certain people, who in turn represent them, and vote again. So essentially, instead of people in Germany all voting on every single issue, they vote on specific people that represent them, and then these people will end up deciding what happens. They'll cast their votes, kind of making it so that there's about 100,000 votes in one when we talk about it. And if you notice, that's exactly the type of government that we have here in the United States. It's another type of democracy. Though it's not like a pure democracy where you vote on everything, it's kind of, adjusted for bigger populations. In addition, these people that are elected, they are elected for 4 years, which means they're constantly going in and out. And anyone, men or women over the age of 20, could be one of those representatives. A few more key details that I think you guys will be interested in know is it had 2 legislative bodies, the Reichstag and the Reichsrat. God, German pronunciations are fun. The way you can think of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat is essentially the House of Representatives and the Senate. They just have 2 bodies in there that, kind of negotiate and work together to make sure that they represent the German people. And some of the basic rules that are founded in the Constitution for Germany. And let me know what you guys think of these. All Germans are equal and have the same civil rights and responsibilities. All Germans have the right to freedom of expression. All Germans have the right to peaceful assembly, and all Germans have the right to a freedom of religion. So, I want you guys, as we come to a close on these notes, to keep in mind and think to yourself, why was why was France so mad at Germany, and do you guys think it was justified? And we look back at some of the things that France made sure happened to Germany. Do you guys think those punishments were a little too harsh, not harsh enough, or were they just right? And try to think to yourself why that is. And most importantly, I think, what do you guys think of the Weimar Republic? Is it a place you'd like to live? Because I look at it and I think, that doesn't sound like a pretty sweet gig, but I do see some problems myself. Think to it yourself, and I'm going to call the notes, I'm going to wrap them up right here. Again, we're going to continue with part 2 in the next session. If you guys wanted to go ahead and get started on that, feel free to, but these will be assigned Monday and Tuesday respectively, and they should be due the following week. I'll post the exact date in Google Classroom later. Alright, till next time, guys. See ya.